as we get started, I want to show you a few pictures. Well, I'm going to start with one. I guess it's always good to start somewhere. So I'm going to start with one, and what I want you to do is study it, and then I'm going to ask you what you see. All right, it's going to be tough. So here we go. Study it. I'll give you about 20 or 30 seconds. Maybe not that long. What do you see?
Mercury.
Mercury. Okay. Unusual answer to start things out.
A big white screen.
A big white screen.
With
Always the
the dot.
nonconformist over here.
With the dot.
Okay. Anybody want to add to that? Now, see, the last time I showed this to a group, it wasn't in this setting, but the last time I showed this to a group and I asked that question, I let them think about it too long. How many of you saw the dot first? Yeah, and that's kind of what you're focused on. Somebody will finally say, I see a white screen. But a lot of folks don't even think about the white screen. Why do we focus on the dot and forget that there's a lot of white around it?
It's contrast.
Contrast? What do you mean?
Well, if the background were blue and there were a white dot, you'd still focus on the dot. Because it's different.
Whatever stands out.
Whatever stands out. It's contrast.
And that's kind of the way life is, isn't it? We tend to focus on certain things that stand out, things that contrast, as you said. We don't always see the other things that are going on around it. So let me show you a few other pictures and let me know what you think about them. What do you see in this one? Now, these are nothing new. These have been in other publications and things like that. But what is going on in this picture? Because you got some guy, I mean, are they standing on top and lowering, or are those the ones on, is he going down or up? I mean, I don't know. That didn't mess with my mind too much. What about this one? Who's in the puzzle and who's helping with the puzzle? It all kind of depends on perspective as to what you see. Now, this one probably is a bit more familiar to a lot of folks. What do you see? Let me ask this first of all. How many of you see a young woman? Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. How many of you see an old woman? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many of you see both? 1, 2. Yeah. Okay. Which one are you having a hard time seeing? The old woman. The young woman. Okay. Okay, I'll let y'all do that. How about that? All right. So the young woman, she's kind of looking away from us. You got a chin right here with her nose, got her ear here. Her hair is flowing backward like this. She's got a choker around her neck. Okay. Now, if you're still looking for the old woman, well, now she's kind of looking off to the side also, except this is her kind of her hooked nose, and this is her mouth, her ear, her eye right here, and her chin's kind of buried there in her blouse. You know, one of the interesting things about folks that have studied these kind of pictures and looking at perspective, one of the things they said is most of the time, people will pick out one picture, one of the two, and they can train their minds to see the other one. But when they come back to the picture, oftentimes they will come back to the picture they first saw. That will be the one that's more natural to them. So, for example, what about this one? What do you see?
I see 3 pictures.
3 pictures. What do you see?
There's the 2 old people staring at each other. Then you have a dude in the sombrero staring at the guy with the beehive on top, and then I see a gold goblet. Or is the goblet supposed to be part of the sombrero, guys?
No. Okay, does everybody see the 3 pictures? Okay, well, let me ask you this one again. Okay, which one do you see first? Did you go back to the one you saw? No, you saw the other one? You were expecting. Of course, you kind of saw both of them anyway. Yeah. All right. What do you see here? Yeah. So you got the word teach on top. And rather than seeing just a reflection of the top word, which you see is the word learn. Again, perspective makes a lot of difference on a lot of these. What about this dude? How many of you see the Eskimo? Okay, how many of you see the Indian? You see both of them?
First, I saw the Indian first.
Saw the Indian first?
Yeah. Me too.
And that's another one that if we were to come back to it later, you'd probably come back to that first impression. And then you can always train your mind to see the other one as well. This one is one of my favorites. What do you see? You see a girl? Okay, so you got the young woman. And then there's a man that looks an awful lot like Bill Clinton. That's one of my favorites because I played saxophone in school, and two of my kids did too, so that was always good. Another one that a lot of people have seen. See both of them? No? Yes? One picture is of a bunny rabbit. Can you see it?
No, I see it.
And you might stand sideways. You can see it. And then the other one is a duck. Okay. This one's a little gruesome. What do you see on this one?
Two ladies, skeleton and a skeleton.
Okay, so some people first see a skull, the two eye sockets, the nose, the teeth. And then other folks will see initially it's a lady getting ready, looking at herself in the mirror. A Victorian lady.
I just didn't know why a lady was in a skull.
Do what?
I said, I just didn't know why a lady was in a skull.
It's a lady in a skull. He's thinking about her. Yes. One more. How about this one? What do you see? You saw good first, and then the word evil inside of it. And again, it will depend on what you see first that your mind will typically come back to. But the way it is in the world is, what is it that we tend to see first when we come to our world? Do we tend to see the good, or do we tend to see the evil? Most of us, there's plenty there to see both of them.
I tend to see the good, and then David tells me what's in the news today, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, you may have to tell David to take a sabbatical from the news.
I know, right?
Yeah. You know, man, it's going to be a great day, and then you look at the news and never mind. Not this time. So what does any of that have to do with our kids and making sure they have faith? Well, Proverbs 22:6, a very familiar passage. Direct your children onto the right path. When they're older, they will not leave it. General statement. Now, those that have heard me talk about this before know that this word direct at the beginning of that sentence, if you go back and you look at some of the footnotes in some of the Bibles, it will tell you that Hebrew word, direct the child in the right path. The older translations say, train your child in the way he should go. That first word could actually be translated start. Get them started in the right direction. Give them that beginning so that they see things the right way, and whenever they get older, that's the thing that they will hopefully keep seeing. That's the thing that they will keep coming back to. And so we're going to be talking about this idea about, will our kids, when they grow up, will they have faith? Because as parents, I know with my kids growing up, that was always one of my primary major concerns about my kids. Would they grow up and would they have faith? But I guess as we talk about that and as we go at it a certain direction in this class, the question itself, well, what does it mean? Will my kids have faith? What is it that we're hoping that they have? Because as the initial slide said, I truly believe, and I've kind of grown to this spot. Whenever I used to teach this class back before I had kids and I knew everything, it was focused on one thing. Now that my kids are on the other side of those growing up years, now I'm seeing it a little bit differently. Because the question about whether our kids will have faith does not necessarily have to do with will they believe. Now, why would I say that? That the question about whether our kids will have faith is not necessarily the question, will they believe?
Because that's just the first step.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, belief, even the demons believe and shiver, you know. It's just a beginning
Yeah.
to true faith.
Because to believe something is one thing. There's a lot of folks that will say they believe in God. And we're even going to notice here in the next couple of weeks how many folks, according to some surveys that have been done, will say that they believe God and they believe in God. But when it comes to actually saying, do you have faith? It doesn't come out in their lives. And that passage you talk about there from the book of James, even the demons believe God. They believe in God, but they shudder at it. They don't live by that. So when we talk about living by faith or having faith, our kids having faith, what we're talking about is, will they grow to live a life that is formed by their faith? Now, as I've said in some other parenting classes, understand parents can do all the right things and kids will still choose something else. And parents can do all the wrong things and the kids will still choose something else. And so it's not like the, what we're going to be talking about in here is not try to get everything exactly right, because then you will definitely have kids that have faith. No, but what we want to do is to provide an environment, provide a home where we raise the odds of that happening with our kids. That they will leave the house and we have given it our best shot and they have been given the best opportunity, the best chance of kind of having that faith. So, what do we need to look at? Well, let's start with this question. What would you say is the greatest threat? Let's talk about a few threats out there, but what would you say is the greatest threat to our children's growth in lifelong sustaining faith?
Probably the parents.
The parents?
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
I knew a lot of people in college that fell away because they were only there because their parents were paying for it. And then because the way their parents raised them, they saw kind of the hypocritical side of Christianity more so than the actual, what we're really trying to present, if that makes sense. And so as the kid grows up, if he starts seeing that mom and dad aren't doing what they preach, probably going to fall away.
So seeing the inconsistency from what a parent is saying and what a parent is emphasizing for a child to do, and then seeing what is going on in their own lives can be one of the big threats.
I think it's the politically correct world, and we just look like idiots when we try to teach something different.
Okay.
Is what we're struggling with right now.
Because the rest of the world that is so much more sophisticated, so much more intelligent, and certainly not stuck back in the old-fashioned way of doing things, the world's become modern, and a bunch of us have stayed stuck. And then they put those two things together and decide, oh, we got to do it like the world does it. Hey, what else do you see? What do you think are some of the biggest threats? What are some of the things you get concerned about as you think about your kids?
Cell phones and peers. Cell phones,
Cell phones?
friends.
Yeah. And now, did you put those two together on purpose, or are those two separate things?
Two separate.
Two separate things?
They go together.
So on the cell phone side of it, what is it about those?
I feel like as adults, sometimes we're not mature enough to even handle some of the things that you see on the news or social media, and so for kids to try to deal with it and sort it out.
One of the things that my wife is the media specialist for one of the elementary schools at Friendship. And one of the things that has really bothered her this year is that Friendship went to one-to-one devices for all the kids. And the school did a pretty good job of blocking a bunch of stuff, but kids are pretty resilient and they're pretty ingenious and they know how to work around some of that stuff. And so they get those devices home and then they can get access to all sorts of things that nobody intended for them ever to get a hold of. And what's funny is that they'll get into some of it and they've got a blocker on there that'll actually freeze up the computer. And so they bring it down. She has to redo it for them. Okay, what'd you get into? I didn't get into anything. Yeah, you did. But yeah, all those things that we can try to protect them. We can try to filter what they see, and yet there's always seems to be a way to get through to it. And of course, friends. I mean, what do you do whenever they have so many friends that don't have the same value system as what you're trying to give your kids? Well, I'm just not going to let them talk to those kids. Well, good luck with that, right? Let me tell you what I think one of the greatest threats to our kids' growth of a lifelong sustaining faith. And it really encompasses everything that you just talked about. I think it's the loss of something that's extremely significant as they move from childhood to adulthood. That from the moving from childhood to adulthood, there is something that is lost in that transition. And this is what I mean by that. I want you to consider Psalm 8. Psalm 8 starts this way. It's a little bit unusual, a little bit confusing maybe. The psalmist says, "O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. From the lips of children and infants, you have ordained praise." That's an interesting statement. That when God created the heavens and the earth, whenever his majesty is in all those things that he created these children, and he says from the lips of the children and infants that he created, he ordained praise. He created praise in them. What do you think he means by that? How exactly does that happen?
I think he means innocence, just like Adam and Eve in the garden. I mean, before they were polluted by evil. Just like kids when they're innocent before they're polluted by the world.
I love the, you hear about different child actors, child stars, and what happens to them over time. Do you remember the stories about Shirley Temple? First of all, everybody knows Shirley Temple. Please say everybody knows Shirley Temple. Someone saying, "No, who are you talking about? Shirley Temple?" Okay. Yeah, old way back, black and white days. Those movies that my kids refused to watch because they were black and white. Y'all remember the Our Game?
Yeah, Little Rascals.
Little Rascals. Yeah,
Oh,
those black and white ones, you
Yeah.
know. And I told my kids, we actually got a DVD set of those, and they said, "We're going to sit down and watch these." And they found out they were black and white. They said, "Are you kidding me? No, we're not going to watch that." I said, "You are going to watch this." Actually, I said, "I want you to watch one, and then we'll go from there." And so we watched one. Let's see another one, and couldn't get enough of them. They just loved them. Well, Shirley Temple was a lot the same way. Do you remember how her mother dealt with Shirley Temple's career as a child actor? She said that in between takes, her mother was very good about taking Shirley Temple and isolating her from the rest of the set. She would isolate her from the rest of the actors, isolate her from the rest of the crew, they would go and do their thing and maybe have, schooling and things like that. And then when it was time for her to be in a scene again, bring her back out. And what they said about that was all the way through Shirley Temple's childhood of being in those movies, you could see it in her eyes. Her eyes had that innocence about it. Her eyes had that sparkle in them, which was what they enjoyed so much about those Shirley Temple movies. Now you go and you look at some other child actors, the ones that aren't protected from that environment, and they don't have the same innocence that's in those eyes. In fact, they wind up going off into all sorts of other things. There's something that happens in a child as that child is created that is tied somehow to this creation that God has created. And then somewhere along the line, as they become adults, there's something that's lost. And maybe a lot of it's because of a lot of the things that were mentioned just a little bit ago. Those different influences in their lives, the different things that hit them. And so as we think about what is that greatest threat, what is it that works against us developing in our kids or instilling in our kids this lifelong sustaining faith? This thing that's lost, what I'm going to call it, and what we're going to be focused on quite a bit in this series is they lose a proper worldview. They lose an understanding of what the world is all about. So let's look at that a little bit. When you think about what a worldview is, how would you define it?
It's the lens in which we see everything,
Okay,
how we process.
how we process the world, how we understand the world, how we filter the world. Anybody want to add to that, or you can argue with it? That's okay.
I would say dark and getting darker.
Okay. What do you mean?
Just by, worldly things.
Okay.
That's what comes to mind when I think of that.
So as you see the world out there, when you view the world, what you see is a world that continually gets more, just to use your language, it gets darker. It moves further and further away from light. Okay.
I would say how we see the people around us and how they act, how they live, as we compare it to our own and adjust accordingly, whether it's good, whether it's bad.
How we see other folks, how we evaluate other folks' actions, how we evaluate other folks' priorities, motivations. Anybody else? What would you add to that? So what worldview does is this is an overarching view of the world, and it directs how we behave in the world. My understanding of what this world is and what this world means, it determines how I interact with it, what I do with it. It is this vision of life and a vision for life. It's my understanding of how life works, how life fits together, how life is. But then it also then instructs me about what I do with my life. I mean, if the world's getting darker and darker and darker, then my reaction to that's my vision of life. Then my reaction for life might be, let me get more separate, more separate, more separate, more separate. If my vision of life is that there are all these negative influences that are going to be influencing my family, influencing my kids, then my vision for life is to try to isolate myself and isolate my family, isolate my kids from that as much as I possibly can. On the other hand, if my vision of life is, hey, it's a pretty good place out there. There's a lot of opportunities, there's a lot of good things, there's a lot of new things out there, a lot of good things to experience, then my vision for life is going to be that I'm going to try to get as close to it and experience as much of that as I possibly can. A lot of it just depends on what your worldview is. A worldview is both descriptive and it's prescriptive. A worldview will describe for me why the world is as it is. When I try to come up with an understanding and an answer about what is going on in our world and what's going on, then my worldview, the way that I see it, the lens through which I see it, then becomes my way of answering and describing this is what I see. But it's also prescriptive. My worldview will decide for me what I think I need to do about this world that I'm in and how I operate in it. So, to put another way, worldview answers the ultimate questions of life, doesn't it? 42. No, Jeffrey. Does everyone know where that comes from? Please tell me you don't know where that comes from. We have some intelligent people. My son, what was that? A guy, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Now, I never read the book.
Oh.
He made me watch the movie. He made me watch the movie. It was the second dumbest movie I've ever seen.
It's really funny.
Yeah. He said the book was a lot better than the movie, and I certainly hope so.
What's the first?
The first, it was a movie, and I'm almost embarrassed to say I watched this one, but it was the other one he made me watch. It was called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum.
Oh,
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I watched the movie version of it, and it had a bunch of big name stars in it. In fact, I guess it was one of the last ones. Anybody knows the name Buster Keaton?
Oh, yeah,
That was what
Yeah, it was one of the last ones that Buster Keaton was in.
I can see why you would like it if you liked our age.
Yeah, and it had its moments, but it was just, anyway. We're not gonna get into movie critiquing and all that. Be Roger Ebert or whatever. No, but yeah, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was one of the, it was the second dumbest movie I've ever seen. And the answer to the meaning of life that it gave was 42.
I did another question.
Now that we have been distracted by Jeffrey enough, let's talk about what the ultimate answers in life are from worldview. See, what worldview will tell you, and maybe if 42 is your worldview, okay, maybe it'll answer these questions for you. I don't know. For example, where am I? Or why am I? Worldview will answer the question about why I'm here and how I got where I am. What are those forces that caused me to be at this point, at this place, at this time? Worldview will tell me who I am. What's my identity? How am I to view myself? How am I to understand who I am and what my place in this world is? Worldview will answer the question, what's wrong? Because as you look out at the world and you read the news or you listen to your husband talk about the news, what your worldview will tell you, instruct for you, is why are things as bad as they are? Why have things gone haywire like they have? And depending on the worldview will determine about, how you deal with that and what answers you have with that. But then it'll also tell us what the remedy is. Okay, we see all the problems in the world. This is how to fix it. Give an example of worldview. How many, we're going to get away from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. How many, do we have any Star Trek fans in here? Jeffrey, I know I can depend on you. There you go.
You would come in one day.
Okay, so this may be a bad illustration. Nobody else is a Star Trek fan.
Rachel's, she's just not there.
Well, no, so you got to be a fan to appreciate it, because there is a specific worldview that comes up in Star Trek.
Space,
Hmm?
Final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise.
That's the introduction. That's not the worldview.
Talking about the Prime Directive?
I'm not talking about the Prime Directive. That's a plot point. when Gene Roddenberry came up with the idea for Star Trek.
Oh, yeah, everybody.
Hmm?
You know, everybody working together. There was no
Yeah,
country or nobody cared about race or anything like that.
he had this idea that what would happen as a species of people is that as we went through the future, that we would learn how to get along and tolerate one another. And it was basically Star Trek was his answer to utopia for society. That we would continue to grow better and better and better and better until finally, his initial stories for Star Trek, he did not want any conflicts between people because people got along. He didn't want technology to be the answer for everything. In fact, for a show that played so much into technology, he really downplayed it and emphasized the human element because it was all about how mankind and womankind was going to continue to evolve into this utopian existence. That
Until you're
was-
assimilated by the board.
See, what happened over time is his writers determined that even though that was a wonderful worldview to have, it didn't sell stories. And so they fought for having conflict among one another.
There's no currency in the Federation.
No, because you didn't need it anymore.
Yeah, you didn't need anymore. Everybody works for the good.
Everybody worked for the good and everybody worked for self-realization.
Yeah.
So you see, again, that was the answer to worldview for his reality. Now, the question is, as we think about our own worldview, what are your answers to these? When you think about why are you here? What answers do you get for that? Because however you answer that question will be an indication of what your worldview is. When you answer the question for yourself, who am I? That answer will come directly from the worldview that has been instilled in you as you've gotten up to this point in your life. When you answer the question of you look around your world and you ask, why has this world gone so wrong? The answer that you give to that question will be an indication of the worldview that you are looking at this world through, the lens that you use to look at this world. And then whenever you say, well, this is how we solve it, this is how we solve the problems in this world, again, it comes directly out of the worldview that has been instilled in your life. And one of the things then we have to answer the question is, that's true of us, it is also true for our kids. And what you see in a lot of instances in families, well, this has been all, you hear about generation gaps and, the younger age looking up at the older age and having, disrespect or disdain or disagreement or dissing whatever it is. What you're looking at is differences in worldview. Coming again, etc. So the question about whether our children have faith will come back to what worldview is being instilled in our kids. Now, let's go to Hebrews chapter 11. As we said earlier tonight, turn in your device to Hebrews 11. Or if you're old school, open up your Bible. Because Hebrews 11 is, of course, that chapter in the Bible that's oftentimes mentioned as this hall of faith. You got all these men and women from, especially the Old Testament, that are stellar examples of people who have faith. And you look at some of the examples that he gives. I mean, he starts out and he says, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Then he talks about Abel bringing a better offering. He talks about Enoch. I mean, listen to verse 5 about Enoch. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it's impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who are earnestly seeking. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world, became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. He goes on to Abraham, and he speaks a lot about Abraham. Of course, Abraham is that individual that Paul called the father of faith. And he says in verse 13, in context of Abraham, all these people were still living in faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they're looking for a country of their own. If they'd been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God's not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And so he goes on and talks about Abraham. Verse 20 he talks about Isaac. Verse 21 about Jacob. Verse 22 about Joseph. And so he goes through Moses. And then at the end of this, he says, verse 32, what more shall I say? I don't have time to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Verse 39, these were all commended for their faith. Yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us they would be made perfect. And then in chapter 12, he wraps it up by saying, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Some translations will say the author of our faith. And so even though Abraham may have been the father of faith, it was Jesus who actually created it. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God, of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. When you look at what he says about faith, what are some of the qualities that you see in this hall of faith? What does it mean to have faith?
Walking blind.
Walking blindly. Why do you say that?
It just made me think about like Abraham not knowing where he's going, but he's just going, and we don't know where our life is going to head. But trying to do the best we can.
You're still moving forward. Okay. What else do you see?
Obedience.
Obedience. That this faith led to action in these people's lives.
I think it's constantly correcting your path so that you use Jesus, God, as a guide. And sometimes you veer a little to the right and you're just like, whoa, I see Jesus over there. I'm going to turn to the left. You veer to the left. I want to see Jesus over there. I'm going to veer to the right, because we're not always on the right path. But faith is keeping our eyes on Jesus.
There's a book, and I wish I remember the title of it, but that was kind of the basis for it, where he said, oftentimes our lives we think is marked out like a road, and you're making this path, and there's certain turns that you have to take. It's kind of like following a Google Maps where it says turn here and turn there, and we wonder, did we take the wrong turn? He says we need to stop thinking about life that way. We need to think about life like following the North Star. That sailors, especially in days of old, they might get off path because the wind would blow them here or the currents would take them here, but they knew where the North Star was, and so they would bring their ship back to stay in line with the direction according to the North Star. And so he says that's what faith is about, is as life moves along and you see yourself making those wrong directions, that you make course adjustments, and it's based on your faith in Jesus Christ. What else do you see? Some of the things that he mentions, and y'all mentioned these, believing the unseen. That's how he starts out. It's believing what can't be seen. You know it's there, and your life is based on what can't be seen. Motivated to give the best. What you see in each of these individuals he talks about are individuals who gave their all, gave their best out of their faith. These are individuals whose lifestyles were formed because of their faith. That obedience, that action that took place, they were active in that faith. It wasn't enough, he says, to know that God exists. You actually act on that understanding. Again, we mentioned obedience. Believing that the impossible is possible. Abraham especially, God told him, you're going to have a son. After a while, that's impossible. But Abraham fully believed that impossible was possible. Almost blind obedience. You mentioned walking forward blindly. They didn't see what was going to be the end of it. They didn't know what was going to be there, but they moved forward anyway. Hope and reliance on the future. They understood that there was something down the road that was better than what they had right now. And so they kept moving toward it. A rejection of the world. They turned their backs on the country that they were a part of, so they were looking for a better country. And he says there was this complete trust in God's power.
Something went wrong. Please try again.
Now, was that me or was that it? Sure. Now, when you see these things, here are some qualities that we see about faith. Do you hear worldview here? Do you see worldview being mentioned here? This is how they interpreted life. This is how they determined where they were. This is how they determined who they were. It was these things that determined what was wrong in this world to them. And this is what they lived by in order to seek the remedy for what was wrong in the world around them. What the Hebrew writer talks about here, these qualities of faith, are actually talking about the worldview that these folks live by. So, we talk about quality of faith, well, what's the alternative? If this is what living a faith-filled worldview is, then what does a faithless worldview look like?
Being tossed by the winds, whatever's popular at the moment.
Yeah, kind of depending on what the latest fad is, what the latest trend is, what's going on. I mean, look at some of the things right next to these. Instead of believing the unseen, I'm relying only on 5 senses. That's what I can see right now. Instead of motivated to give the best, anything will do. Instead of living a lifestyle based on faith, it just depends on what's good for the moment. Periodic, not a characteristic of my life. Rather than being active, life becomes rather passive when it comes to faith. Instead of obedient, disobedient. I turn my back on it. The impossible is possible. The alternative is the impossible is truly impossible. How many times have we heard ad nauseum through the pandemic? You got to follow the science, follow the science, follow the science. There's a worldview there. And even though there's a lot of politics involved in that statement today, listen to the worldview. In fact, by the time we're finished, we're going to talk about worldview ad nauseum, because I want you to be able to see everything through the lens of worldview. What is the worldview of the news that you're listening to? That newscaster. What is the worldview of this author that you're reading? What is the worldview of these national leaders, whether it's this country or that country or wherever it is? Almost blind obedience? No, you got to show me. I'm not going to follow without you proving it to me first. Instead of hope and reliance on the future, today's all there is. Paul talked about that, didn't he? Why don't we act like some people say, eat, drink, and be merry? Tomorrow I'm going to die. Instead of rejection of the world, it's acceptance of the world and all that it has to offer. And instead of a complete trust in God's power, it's conditional trust in God's power. I'll trust Him when it makes sense to me. I'll trust Him whenever I see the good it's doing me. I'll trust Him whenever I agree with what He's doing in my life. I'll trust Him, but it's always dependent on my evaluation of whether or not it's trustworthy. And so again, you see worldview here as well. Because when it comes down to it, everything in life will come back to what your worldview is. Even people who, let me backtrack a little bit. Even those of us who believe we have developed a rather strong faith, maybe it's good for us to step back sometimes and put our own worldview to the test. Is what I say I believe exactly what I believe? Is what I hope that I am becoming, is that actually what I'm living? Because I can say one thing, but exactly what I'm doing and how I'm working out my life may reveal a worldview that is not what I actually hope will happen in my life. So, as we started, will your children have faith? Because it's more than just believing. I want us to understand, we want to get our kids ready to see the world the way that God wants them to see it. That's the life of faith. Coming to see the world the way that God sees it. I mean, He was the one that created it. He's the one that organized it. He's the one that sustains it. And so if I'm going to be a person of faith, then I want to be able to develop into a kind of person that I'm seeing the world with the worldview that God has. Because He can see it a lot clearer than any of the rest of us. And as I'm raising my kids, what I want to instill in them is a worldview that sees the world the way that God sees it also. So over the next several weeks, we're going to be talking some practical things about how we do that. How do we develop worldview? First, for ourselves, but then how do we pass that on to our kids? How do we help them grow in this kind of